More joining us live is Angelo Gavrielatos, the president of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. Angelo, I appreciate your time. Firstly, if the lockdown is lifted next Friday as planned and teachers are back in the classroom after that, are they going to be willing to get back in there if there is still a high number of cases being reported every day in the community?
Well, those numbers are quite concerning, aren't they, Ashley? And good afternoon to you and your viewers. We're focusing at the moment on next week. We're not anywhere near looking at what will happen the week after that. With respect to what's happening next week and the pressures that our teachers and principals have been put under in order to pivot and now create online lessons, that is putting incredible pressure and stress on our teachers and principals. Indeed, that stress and pressure is being added to because the department's technology system, its portal, the portal which provides access for teachers and principals to material, to their emails, to calendars, to Zoom, has been down since yesterday. That's putting incredible pressure on our teachers to prepare themselves for what will be a difficult challenge next week.
Sounds like terrible timing regarding the online portal. Are you encouraged, though, by the sounds we're hearing from the New South Wales government about making masks mandatory for high school students?
Well, just on that, Ashley, what we've said right from the start since last year, what we would expect and hope for is a consistency in the application of restrictions and requirements across all settings in affected areas. So if it's mandatory to wear masks in a shopping centre or in another workplace, so it should be mandatory in a school setting. Now, I know that won't make life easy for teachers and students, and clearly we would all prefer it to be otherwise. But consistency in the application of the health advice in all settings in affected areas is vitally important such that there is no contradictions, because when there are contradictions, that undermines confidence.
The New South Wales Premier was pressed on this issue yesterday in her news conference, and she said yesterday that schools weren't closed because they're not safe. She said they were closed essentially to limit mobility in the community, i.e. it's the parents gathering at the school gate that health authorities are keen to avoid. Would you agree with that schools are a safe place when there is community transmission at the levels we're seeing?
Well, that's a most disappointing statement that on the part of the Premier. We know since this latest outbreak, there's been at least 37 cases amongst young people aged 10 to 19 and 25 cases involving children under the age of 10. We know that the strain, this Delta strain, is such that children can contract it and transmit it, increasing the risks for all involved. Schools are hothouse environments. You know, you can have more than 1,000 children, more than 100 teachers congregating on a school site, the architecture of which makes social distancing next to impossible. This Delta strain has resulted in new assessments being made with respect to the dangers inherent and the risks that still exist with respect to the pandemic. And that was reinforced by medical experts and the Chief Health Officer as well.
Do we know what proportion of teaching staff have been vaccinated?
Well, actually, we don't have those figures, but I'd expect they'd be no different to the general public. We have 47% of teaching staff in New South Wales that are under the age of 40, 72% under the age of 50. It's for those reasons that we are continuing to call on the federal government to prioritise teachers with respect to the vaccination rollout. Our calls and representations are supported by the New South Wales State Minister Mitchell, who has in February of this year and 10 days or so ago and today on media echoed our calls for prioritisation of teachers. Had we not been in this mess with respect to the rollout, we would have all been vaccinated by the end of March, as the federal government had promised. But due to a monumental failure on the part of the federal government, here we are, where we find ourselves exposed to these risks. It's high time that the federal government recognise the risks inherent in the school environment and prioritise teachers. And just to be clear, Ashley, when we say that teachers and education workers should be prioritised, we're not suggesting that they should be prioritised over and above aged care workers or those in the quarantine system, but they should certainly be prioritised with respect to this rollout. Teachers are trying to make bookings to get their vaccination and are being given dates of September and October. That is not good enough.
Angelo, what do we actually know at this point about online learning and how it does impact academic outcomes for our kids? I mean, for New South Wales school students, well, Sydney really, it's only looking like 4 days of online learning at this point. But I mean, I know as a parent who's watched this process over the past year, it seems pretty obvious that online learning is no comparison to face-to-face learning.
So beyond our concerns for our teachers and principals and the impact of online learning or remote learning, call it what you like, the impact on them, we're also concerned about its impact on kids, but also on parents. These are not ideal situations, and these are not situations that we would prefer to be in. These are difficult times, and we ask for everyone to be patient in these difficult times. I also want to make it clear that teachers are also parents and brothers and sisters and grandparents. So they're impacted by this, not only in their professional sense, but in their personal lives as well. It's hardly the ideal situation, but health and safety must come first.
Okay, Angelo, just before you go, can I just clarify, I know that you said that you're focusing on next week and beyond that is still something that you'll be working on, but if there is still a significant level of community transmission, will teachers be reluctant to turn up to school the week after? Will you be urging the New South Wales Government to keep schools closed?
Our position will remain the same, that a consistent application of restrictions across all settings in impacted areas. That's all we've said right from the start, a consistent application. If it's considered that the lockdown needs to be extended, and we certainly hope it's not, then there'll be a consistent application in all settings, including schools, with respect to what those requirements will be.
Right, so a lockdown continuing, but with schools open, like the situation we saw in Perth during its last lockdown, where schools remained open, that's not good enough in your view?
Well, clearly not. What a contradiction. What a contradiction. We're saying we need to extend the lockdown, but we're satisfied in seeing more than 1 million children crisscrossing suburbs, more than 100,000 teachers crisscrossing suburbs. The Premier yesterday talked about the importance of reducing mobility. Mobility is not reduced in those circumstances, it's amplified dramatically.